One.
Nice.
All right. Episode 2 of the Douglas Fir Roninswanson podcast. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's a fucking war. Um, oh, sweet. People joined on Instagram. I'm live on Twitch. Me and Douglas Fir are talking about Ukraine. And yeah, feel free to join. Um, what do you want to talk about, Doug?
What do we want to? Well, we put out a couple questions on Instagram. You and I both.
Yep. Why don't I start with mine because that's so. Um, how do I put it? I only had one. I had one response.
Yeah.
So we'll get mine out of the way. It's really hard getting people to talk, I'm finding.
Wonder why that is.
Or they just like don't know what to say, which is also totally fair.
Yeah.
So their response was just they want us to talk about peace and like how do we live and cultivate peace within and with each other, which is kind of like general, could seem kind of hokey, but like for real, like war is hell, and I think neither of us are like pro-war here. And like, how do we cultivate peace? I honestly like don't have an answer. Like, I feel like this is the line. Like I've said before, like you can be anti-imperialist, not anti-war. Like you can support people defending themselves. And I don't know. I heard people talk about like violence is never ever the answer, never solves anything. But it's like I don't know if you could argue that to someone who's like defending their home from an invader. You know, I don't know if that's your place, and like maybe that will bring an outcome that they want that secures their livelihood.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
don't think that answer is very. It's not very leftist of them. Violence is never the answer.
I don't.
Sometimes peace has to be seized, and if you're a population that's under bombing, whether it's American bombs or Russian bombs, you do have to use violence to pursue peace. Or you can not exist. That's another option. I mean, you could just kind of lay down and
Yeah, like
let the tide roll
massive,
over you.
massive nonviolent protest. Like it has worked, but
Yeah. And well, massive nonviolent protests, and they're great and massive and nonviolent. And then there's always that point, right?
yeah. Oh wait,
Where
we got someone in the Twitch chat. Who is Hood Pocahontas? I love the name. But they're saying that's like saying don't protect yourself from a vicious dog. Like, hi, survival is the only option. Yeah, I think there's like
definitely,
there's a detachment from violence in like in the West. I'd say like in like North America. You know, even being raised like violence is always bad. And I'm not saying violence is good. Like I've been in fights. I've had the shit kicked out of me. Like it's terrible. I would not wish that on anyone. And I'm not like better for it because it happened. But I think there's like room for having like healthy physical contact with people where you're like in tune with your body and know how to like fight if you had to. Like I don't think that's a bad thing, you know? And I think people aren't even like willing to talk about that. It's just like, you know, violence is just seen as aggression. Like physical, you know, combat is seen as like aggression and bad.
yeah.
I don't know. I was thinking of Raph, the kid at Fairy Creek, who's like 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
and knows like how many martial arts, and he would never hurt a fly, but he's like, you know, capable and can defend himself.
Yeah. And I think what Pocahontas is saying too is like, it's like, yeah, I feel like people don't say like, we're not talking about going up and punching strangers, but I think it's like so polarized and intense right now that if you say like I had someone, I posted something maybe mildly hawkish, but ultimately it was just in defense of Ukrainians sticking up for themselves. And it might have been something like, yeah, they're going to grind the Russians into the mother dirt of Ukraine and blah, blah, blah. I think it was a Cossack Gundy thing. And someone's just like, sends me a message like, war's never the answer. And it's just like, it's like there's a difference between being in a war and then having war being acted on you. And it's what Iraqis felt when the US invaded. It's what Ukrainians are feeling when Russia invades. It's what, like, there's a huge difference. And I don't think you can't be a good leftist and not support like the little guy's struggle in these things. I don't know. There's no alternative. It's very easy to say, how do we cultivate peace and how do we achieve all this peace and all this? But it's an entirely different thing to actually come up with any sort of solution that is in the realm of realism. And I don't know. Maybe it's just a symptom of the world we live in right now, but it's like these things all sound really nice. They're great tweets, but they're just statements. They're not solutions. They're not a conversation. They're not like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just people making a statement. We just live in an echo chamber of statements.
All right. That was it. That was my only question.
That's your only question?
That was my only question.
All right.
So why don't we dig into some of what you got?
Okay. I got one about holding predator, because we asked about Fairy Creek too, holding predators accountable on front lines in activism circles, which is a very important question. How do you hold them accountable? We know Fairy Creek has had serious issues with this, and they've all been to varying different degrees. We know that the right way to do it, I think, is the removal of that person from that space. So it's a safe space. We have to remember that these places are full of traumatized people and vulnerable people. And it could be very, very dangerous for someone to have to experience some sort of trauma from some sort of person, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse or whatever kind of harm that people do in these spaces is kind of amplified because they're not safe spaces. There's a lot of talk at Fairy Creek about how it was a safe space, and there's these circles and there's all this like conversation about safety and being in the right way and talking and this is the same thing on all the front lines. But these are inherently dangerous spaces. They're incredibly not safe. And because of such, if there's an issue with somebody causing any sort of harm in these spaces, they have to be removed immediately. And we've seen people at front lines and at Fairy Creek that have either removed themselves or they've been removed. And then we've seen the operation, like the Rainforest Flying Squad, if you want to call it that, which isn't an operation, but we've seen other various like quote unquote management up there actively protect people that were causing harm in those spaces. And I think I haven't been in touch much with the whole Fairy Creek thing lately, but they have continued to protect people and excuse racism and excuse violence and all those things up there. And it really sucks. It's going to really harm their season 2, as they're calling it, which is apparently starting in a couple weeks at Fairy Creek, another season of blockading, and perhaps that entire idea of season 2 and the second season up there is part of the problem, and part of the problem harm continues to be perpetuated in spaces like Fairy Creek because it's not really seen as a movement at this point. It almost seems like it's a TV series.
Mic off.
And the TV series is like season 8 of The Office. They should have quit a season ago because of shit without Michael Scott.
Mic on.
And like you can't treat it like you're stars of some sort of television series, and you're more concerned about how the movement is marketed rather than what the movement is doing, what like substantiative things it's accomplishing. Yeah, that's my opinion on that. I don't know if I'm going to go up to Fairy Creek this year or not. I haven't reached out to anyone, but no one's reached out to me either. And as far as I know, they haven't reached out to anyone independent, maybe Arvin or something, but any independent photographer or journalist. There's been very little reach out. I know Colin hasn't been contacted, and he has consistently showed up for every single fucking thing for the last 14 years. And
sunsets.
And every sunset. Yeah. And so yeah, we'll see what happens there. I got some people in my comments too asking about photos. What's his name? Mitch Gordon. I don't know if this guy's gonna see it, but yeah, I got so many great photos from Fairy Creek. He's asking specifically about a day at Waterfall when, can't remember the sergeant's name, but they were doing like Linky Army sit downs all the way up the road at Waterfall. Mm-hmm. And it was a really positive day, but also a really violent day because they were like really ripping people out of this chain. And yeah, it's never good. Like those Linky armies are like, I don't know. There's some opinions on those things. I don't know how effective they are. It depends on who is in charge of the operations. Like if Jason Charney's up there and you Linky army, he's like just gonna kick everyone's head in and arrest everybody. But we had God, what was his name? Burke, maybe? Was there a Burke up there?
There might have been. I only ever met like Reddy and Charney.
Right. I think it could have been this Burke guy. And he was just like, he was a company man. Like he went in, punched the clock till like 3. Like I overheard him saying one time, like looking at a sheet of paper and to like the other guy being like, 4 today? 4's great. And they like called it a day, like there was sergeants that didn't have their heart in it. And there were sergeants that were like a cop's cop and they just have black cop hearts and they're just awful people. But this guy was pretty chill. And I remember it distinctly because it was the first day that I shot in the ditch inside their exclusion zone. And I was able to achieve that simply by ignoring them. I just ignored them, completely ignored their commands. I just stayed in the ditch. When they came right up to me, I just kind of like filmed it and was just like, my name's David Furlonger. I'm a photographer. I'm not impeding. I'm off the road. I'm not violating the injunction. This is my name. This is my phone number, blah, blah, blah. And they just left me alone. So I was able to shoot right at the line where they're pulling people out that day. And I think this is why this guy wants these shots, or I don't know what he wants, but some of the video and the shots were pretty crazy when they're kind of yanking everyone out. And I was like, I had a 35 to 200 lens and I was 15 feet away, like I could like zoom into people's eyeballs. So yeah, Gordon or Mitch or Gordon Mitch or whichever your first name is, I will have those up on my website when I feel like it.
Was that the question? Like, how were you able to get them?
No, like I think they want to see.
Oh, you want a copy of them?
The photos. Yeah.
Oh.
So the answer is I'll do it when I fucking wanna. That's my answer.
There you go. I want to note that like that only works for Doug. Like I was
What,
arrested.
shooting in the ditch?
I was arrested on the side of the road, not impeding, after the Thompson decision, and it didn't matter.
Yeah.
We call that white privilege.
Yeah. Maybe it's definitely like a high possibility that was what was going on, especially when I'm like, yeah. They didn't know. They don't. This particular shift doesn't know me. Like, I think they make these like calculations in their mind. Mm-hmm. They're like, and what are the series of calculations? It's not only about whiteness, but like that's a major one. They're like, hey, wait, he's white. It's like, hey, do we know this guy? And then the next thing that's going through their mind is like, okay, does this guy like, is he like with a legacy outlet? Like, does he have a big plot? Like, I think they like think about these things.
Oh yeah.
And if they kind of know you, they're familiar with you, and they're like, non-white guy, had like shit posts on a blog, mouths us off or something, lips us off, then they're just like, yeah, they're gonna,
yeah,
yeah, they're dumb, but they're not dumb.
But it also reaches another point where like Arvin is up in Wet'suwet'en right now, and officers from Fairy Creek are there, and they recognize him, like, oh, I haven't seen you since Fairy Creek, and they just ignore him, and like he just does his thing.
Yep.
And it's almost this like you're almost like going to the same job site.
Right. Well, it is his job.
Yeah.
It was all our jobs.
No, but I mean like the relationship.
Right.
If you go there long enough, it becomes this sort of like casual thing. It's weird.
Yeah. Especially when they know you're not there to fuck up. Yeah. You're not there like, yeah. And this is being recorded, so I can't say everything, but you're not there to blockade.
No.
Yeah. And Arvin's one of those guys too that just kind of like squirrels around the exclusion zone.
Yeah.
And I think someone recently asked me, they had tips. They were asking about how to document in those spaces when there's like a lot of cops and there's a lot of protesters. And that's good advice. It's something that I tried to do. It's something that Arvin's really good at. And it's just kind of minding your own business and just kind of like moving around the space in a visible way and just kind of doing your job and not talking to cops really. If you have to make an introduction to the MRO or the sergeant, make it quick, make it just like very like curt and very like, this is what I'm doing here, and then do your thing.
Yeah. Anthea, I don't know if you're still there. There's someone on Instagram. Please follow on Twitch or join on Twitch and watch, and you can hear this. There's someone who's asked me specifically about like how to start doing this kind of thing and like covering front lines, and they're really curious. And
yeah, yes, yeah. This is I've chatted a little bit with them too, and down in the USA. I won't talk them, but somewhere in the USA.
Arvin and I talked about
and
this.
I don't know.
What?
No, sorry. As you like the hair flip? Fuck.
Dash it.
I was just saying, up here we have these organizations that like people will either, give credit or discredit to, whatever.
My God.
But there's something like the CHA up here, and I know in the States they have a few statewide and federal wide. Like there's more options for these kind of journalist collectives that have these associate member fees in them. You could get mentorships through them though, which is probably the most useful thing out of them. So including the CAJ, like you could get a mentorship, which could be really helpful if you're just starting out. I think in fact it's helpful anytime. never a bad idea, even if you don't agree with legacies,
Mm-hmm.
with legacy journalism process and everything they do. I think there's still like, you're crazy to think there's no value in hanging out with like some sort of established journalist that writes for Washington Post or New York Times or CBC, or like these are valuable things. You take as many lessons from it as you want, but you'll definitely learn some stuff.
Yeah. Um, Something I try to tell people too is like, I I don't think school is necessary, and I don't speak just like of my own experience, but like I didn't go to school for photography or writing, and people I know that did like don't really have as much of a leg up as you would think 4 years of education would do. Like it's such a learn as you go, and it's so multifaceted. It's like, oh, you can take a pretty picture, but like you also have to navigate all of these like constant and changing circumstances to get that photograph. And like you just don't learn stuff like that until you're literally in it. And when most people ask, I just tell them like go out, just go to the next march, go to the next protest, whatever it is, and just like just do it. And
Yeah.
a couple people
I
are actually
mean,
like, sorry, a couple people are really, it's good that they're cautious, but they're like really afraid of causing harm and doing the
mhm.
wrong thing and photographing someone. I'm like, how do you navigate consent? Because they're aware of consent culture and like very mindful of it. And um, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. You're never going to get it perfectly, but you just have to go out there and do your best and do your best not to cause harm and talk to people when you can. You won't always be able to, but yeah, I don't know. Just go
Yeah.
out and shoot. That's what I tell people first off. And if they ever have questions, like they can come and my inbox is open if people want to talk about details.
Yeah, 100%. You got to go out and shoot. You got to know how to use the camera,
Yeah.
and then you can go to these. You go to these front lines. They are definitely, like I said, they're not safe spaces. They're often violent. They're often exploitative. They're often extractive in ways, especially when you're a photographer or you're a journalist. A lot of people in those movements feel that, like, I mean, you could do a really good job, and you could still have half a movement be like, oh, they're just an extractivist photographer or journalist.
Mhm.
Um, so I think, yeah, it can be tricky, I guess. Um, it's good to do a little education before you go on the subject matter. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, you don't want to go up there and then like, get in a fight with someone about pronouns or something. Because like you don't want to do something ridiculous. Like you don't want to be just like a clueless glub, just like
Yeah.
open around in there and not even really understanding the people's politics that you're interacting with and you're reporting on or you're shooting, or their feelings and their stances on where they are. Like you don't want to go up there like Aaron Gunn did, right? I think he went up to Fairy Creek for a day. No one would talk to him.
Don't even know who that
Uh,
is.
no, yeah, you don't want to know who this is. But
Aaron Gunn. Here we go.
fuck, he's the worst.
A voice for common sense.
Anytime someone says a voice for common sense, they're about to say some racist shit.
Oh, is this the green? No, he's not green. He's
No,
conservative.
liberal. Oh,
Liberal.
conservative? Yeah, one of the two.
Blue is liberal. Ugh. Wait, that's him? Is that goatee photoshopped? What the fuck?
He's a douchey dude.
Look at that thing. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why did he put himself 3 times in one page?
That'd be funny if the guy on the right was also him. There's just 3 of them. There is. Oh my god. Why is there 3? This guy's
dad?
like,
It's got to be his dad.
yeah.
No, this looks like painted on, this thing over here. With like a fine Sharpie. Sorry, get fucked, Aaron.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Guys suck. Sidebar. Okay, let's
Before we
the
switch off,
meat
I
of it.
want to share something that I haven't posted about yet about mentorship. A while back, I posted a picture of my cameras and gear and was like, "Hey, I'd like to offer like support, mentorship. I can loan out my gear because I have 2 bodies and a bunch of lenses. If someone wants to learn who doesn't have access to gear because it's expensive, and like preference to like a BIPOC or like Indigenous person." And a couple of people responded. It was great. I've talked to a few folks, but no one really local to Vancouver that I can like interact with regularly. And someone came up to me and asked for support in replacing some lost camera gear and lost and like damaged by the RC or police, VPD and RCMP, in all the times they've been arrested and detained. And I've witnessed some of their one of their arrests, and it was brutal. And they're just having a really hard time, and they really want to go back to shooting. And very much like creative, not necessarily like a journalistic style like you and I. But I was happy to support them, and I am like super happy to announce that like I connected with someone who donated to her a nice Sony camera and 3 lenses to shoot with. And yeah, it all went really well. I introduced them. They, exchanged the camera and gear, went to someone who was really going to use it. And yeah, I just want to like share that really, really positive news. So, anyways.
So, yeah. Reach out. You never know. A photographer friend of yours could find you some gear.
Exactly. Like, if you need assistance, ask for help, and like people will try. I believe in that. So, anyways, go on, carry on, Doug.
Carry on.
Follow that.
I got one other question besides just the usual BS that I get in my inbox about Ukraine. But one specific question is about. Let me just find it here. Well, I have 2, right? I have the one about the no-fly zone, which we kind of talked about last time, and then I put up a pretty funny poll that one of the polls was close the Ukrainian airspace with a question mark, and that is currently at I got 60 people voted. Okay. I don't know if that's statistically significant. I don't have confident intervals for anyone or p-values. I'm not a statistician.
P-values.
But with my followers, you actually have 55% saying yes to closing it, which is higher than I thought it would be. A few slides later, it says create a no-fly zone but leads to a wider European conflict, which would be a logical conclusion to closing the airspace. And now we only have 34% saying yes. It's funny how you frame things is important. Yeah, like a few people in particular voted yes, and then they're like, oh no. And I guess like there's something to be said. Like if you could close that airspace and you just knew it wouldn't lead to a wider conflict. You just knew it. The only thing that would be flexed on would be Russian jets, helicopters, air support, and they would be, shot down or escorted back to Russian airspace. And it would not start a war. Like, it just wouldn't. You just knew. You had a crystal ball. What do you think? You do it, or you keep it open?
You do it. Hands down.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, I probably agree with that. I mean, you might do it anyway. That's the interesting thing. It's like, so some of the feedback on that is just like, some people say they should close it and then they should call Vlad's bluff. You know, like, oh, will he escalate it? Like, if we close this, like if NATO or any country closes that airspace and they shoot down a couple Russian helicopters or MiGs. I mean, the ball is kind of like, I guess, in his court. What does he do? Does he escalate?
I don't know.
Hard to say, right? So this is like the couple of responses I've gotten are just like they think someone should just call his bluff and close it anyway, right? Which is risky.
It's probably the assumption that Vlad is just like a straight up evil supervillain that he's gonna strike first every single time, and it's like he's also like making, choices, like tactical choices, whether or not they're, smart is up for debate. But just because you've set up a no-fly zone doesn't mean he's automatically going to go and shoot down NATO jets
or nuke someone.
Like
it's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because you have the stance from a lot of people that I know that are anti-war that are like, you close that airspace, it just escalates into a wider conflict for sure. And they're almost and they're like begging people for nuance. They're like, well, it's not just simple, like Russia's not just evil, but at the same time, by just being like stone cold, you can't close that airspace because he's going to nuke us. They're making assumptions of Vlad just being like a caricature of evil, whereas like the more hawkish people are like, no, he's a smart guy, like call his bluff. He's not going to like throw up a nuke. And I tend to maybe agree with that. Like, I feel like he's like been playing chess for like 15 years.
Yeah. And
people need to like recognize this guy's game and like how clever and crafty he is and how good he is at this geopolitics stuff. Right? So I don't think he would just start nuking shit.
No, God, no.
I'm not saying that I should think they should close the airspace. I'm just saying that like he's not this caricature. He's playing chess. He's probably a step or two ahead of where Joe Biden is. I'm sure.
Joe Biden's irrelevant.
Well, yeah, he's geriatric, but I think I mentioned this. I don't think we mentioned it last time, but I mentioned it in my stories that Putin, the day that he announced that the Donbass was going to be an autonomous region, he recognized their independence. Mm-hmm. Right? That same day, he shut the cameras off and pre-recorded a declaration of war. Mm-hmm. So like that same day, which was 3 days before they invaded, or 4 days, that same day he went on TV and he said, no, we're not going to invade anyone. We're just, we're recognizing their thing. Like Ukraine has to do the right thing. They got to recognize their autonomy. And then he just shut the cameras off and then just pre-recorded what they aired 4 days later, which was just like, we have a special operation going into Ukraine. So this guy's like he's not an idiot.
Yeah.
He has a plan. And I think that's almost what's the most unnerving for some people that I know is they're like, what is he planning? And yeah, you got a commenter saying like talking about the value of the resources.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, it's huge. And I think I've also mentioned this in another story, but when fracking and shale gas technology kind of took that big leap, probably like, I don't even know, like 10 years ago, it created petrostates out of where there wasn't petrostates before. So the Ukraine had, no no resources really to speak of for oil and gas before that. But once they kind of surveyed all that shale gas, overnight. It went to the 14th largest um, reserves of oil in the world, right? And I think that kind of like changed the game a little bit. I think it changed the game for the West and for Putin. The West saw it as an opportunity, obviously, to reduce their reliance on Russian oil and Russian resources. And Putin saw it as a threat to Russian resources and Russian oil. And this is like probably one of the reasons in like a soup of calculations that this guy made, and we can never know his mind. It's not the reason, but you got to think that it factored in some way to the decisions from both NATO and from Putin in the last 15 years or so.
Yeah. Like you also, I don't think you can't underestimate the cultural aspect of Ukraine, though. Like he sees it as part of Russia, historically part of Russia, in this skewed vision um, of a Russian empire.
Yeah, I think there's pretty undisputable evidence that like the hawkish right wing academics in surrounding Putin and in Russia. And I know I've posted about Alexander Dugin before, and there's a few other ones that are around him. It's plain as day. It's written in textbooks that are very popular and taught in Russia's military academy about reinstating the sphere of influence that they largely lost after the Cold War and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they're gaining it back. And we've seen this recently, like in 2008 with Georgia, with Syria, with now in Tigray, now in Ukraine, Crimea in 2014. The like Putin is trying to get this like sphere of influence back to match the USA's. So every time we're seeing a NATO proxy or a NATO in a country fucking around with politics, we're starting to see that Russia's going like they're on the other side of the coin again, which they always used to be in the 80s. It was always them and them. And I'm not sure which is worse. Like I don't know if like I don't like the idea of the U.S. just walking around the world doing whatever the fuck they want, swinging their dick around. But I also don't like the idea of Russia kind of coming up against that. Like I feel like when they're both at it, there's more harm than when it's just like, perhaps the U.S. just trying to politically meddle or muddle with a country where once you have another superpower sphere of influence come in, it kind of goes from politicking and games to well, in Ukraine, conventional war, but we also see proxy wars in Syria, Tigray, stuff like this, right? So is it more harmful to have both of them at in the octagon, or is it more harmful for one? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer, but
I think it's more harmful for both. But I mean, the best would be if neither existed.
ideally, I think there's a lot of Western opinion on Ukraine about what they should do or shouldn't do, or what NATO should do or shouldn't do, or what Ukraine or Russia should do or shouldn't do. And I don't know if enough people are asking what Ukrainian wants to do, like Ukrainians want to actually do,
Yeah.
which would be a good start. Like, I think everyone else should be able to have this to manifest their own, to actualize their own nation or whatever they want to actualize,
Self-determination.
like without having these massive spheres of influence go in there and blow people up.
Yeah. The reason I support the no-fly zone is from the photographers that I follow, who I've got saved, in here. Some of their sentiments and then the sentiments of people that they've documented. And that's my only window, like right into Ukraine. And I've seen a lot of death. I've seen a lot of innocent lives lost, and a lot of people crying for safety, and like crying for a no-fly zone because people are dying right now.
Mhm.
I'm not a fucking hawk. It's like I'm literally following, you know, what I've witnessed, and I take it at face value because it's the best I can do from here.
Yeah, and it's you're consuming raw data, and I'm doing that as well. A lot of accounts, a lot of independent journalists and photojournalists, and even just people in the armed forces, even.
Mm.
And this came up with a friend today, who is he's very intelligent when it comes to kind of East-West relations. He's like a, like classic like leftist guy. Um, but argues from like a place of good faith. And I think I said almost the same thing where it feels really academic when we talk about it over here, or when people like have very strong takes one way or the other. And when you're consuming just like the raw feed out of Ukraine, it's a lot harder to be like, well, let's have an academic conversation over Azov versus Wagner, or NATO, like private military contractors, or like German whatever oil and gas. Like it all feels grossly academic sometimes to me, because it's like I'm having these like very theoretical talks about like nation versus state, or Ukraine versus Ukrainians, or like what really happened when Stalin starved a bunch of Ukrainians, or like, like who's worse, NATO or Russia. And then I go on to my feeds and I'm just getting like raw LinkedIn to the Ukrainian photojournalists on the ground, and I'm seeing children with like half a fucking head. And it makes it very hard to not kind of be like, I think the people that have the most to lose need to like be centered in your sphere of information, in your kind of information environment. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people need to follow more of these people on Instagram to really just get the link up, the raw stuff. And quit if you have a problem with Russian propaganda versus NATO propaganda, or you think one's better than the other, or one's worse, or one's more sneaky and one's more blame, whatever your opinion is on that, just bypass both of them and just see what people that are just like, filming RPG rounds going into wherever, like that are right there. Yeah. And they're just snapping photos and it's just going in. There's no editorializing in it.
So GFX asked, can you recommend some photojournalists to follow over there? Yes, that was asked last stream, and so in here I've saved a bunch of these are from individual journalists, and I'm going to put up a document or make a post with every one of their usernames, and we're going to talk about some of these later. I was going to say another account I follow called Cinema Stereo. She's an indigenous person in the Bay Area, very vocal on Instagram, a lot of followers. She asked for some help finding the right people to follow to get the right information, because there's a lot of misinformation going about. And she posted something that was a doctored video of someone running away from a building in, you know what, I can probably just bring it up. It's actually like really informative to show, because it breaks down how this person made a fake video of someone fleeing a thing in Ukraine. Here. And like a lot of the footage that we're seeing come out of Ukraine is pretty grainy. It's like this. You can't upload a full resolution video when you're running off satellite internet. That's unreliable. Like, we know this from Fairy Creek. Like, you're just not getting everything immediately. So
yeah,
you know, she posts about this, and I said, go to photojournalists first and foremost. If they're found to be doctoring footage, they lose all credibility. And yeah, she asked me.
And yeah,
So go ahead.
when they're on the ground shooting there on the daily, they don't have. It's very rare to get like raw footage out of there where they're like going into editing suites and doing this kind of work on these videos. Like these videos are probably from they're probably getting posted from maybe conflict accounts or war accounts that are still third person. Like we both follow Atlas News, and I think we both follow like Conflict Observer and various other accounts that kind of just watch these wars. But these guys are in the U.S. and they have posted. I know, like I think Rage X posted like footage of a fighter jet dogfight from a video game, and it got onto Anarcho Anon for like 3 hours. Yeah. So like so then they'll disseminate, and then like I think Anarcho Anon took it down because he probably got messages being like, "Hey, that's a video game." But those things happen. So like you said, the best way to do it is get plugged in directly from people that are taking the photos on the ground daily.
Yeah,
because they're just not in there doing CG. And these photographers, like, they're not just like schmoes like us. Basically, they're like, they're you have Pulitzer Prize winning photographers in there that are just like getting down and dirty and getting some incredible footage that's wild, like in incredibly risky areas. Like they are feet from where people are getting blown up, and it's a miracle no one's died yet. That's been there just documenting, like a non-national Ukrainian that's been in there documenting. I'm very surprised that I haven't heard of anyone being killed.
Yeah,
like that's how close these people are to the action, and they're all on assignment from various organizations, right? Like
not all. Yeah,
there's like not all of them, but some will be like they'll be like they take assignment, right? So they're not like they're not really part of a legacy apparatus as much as they like have assignment from LA Times for this particular conflict, and they generally just do freelance, right? So I'd say reliable. Like I trust a guy like that, or a girl like that. Someone that has a camera, that's taking assignment, that has 20,000 followers, enough credibility to be cautious, to not fuck that up, or to not doctor stuff, but not so much that they're compromised by any sort of like editorial pressure.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, this is my speculation. I feel like that's the future of like journalism. Like that's the whole reason I'm doing this the way I'm doing it, is like I really believe like that this is going to be the way forward because of distrust in media, that people are going to want to go directly to the source. And I think we're just seeing that more and more, and exacerbated by a literal war.
Yeah. No, I think you're actually right. I think you have access to go right to the source now, and you never used to have that as well. It's the same way like I grew up skateboarding, and 15 years ago when YouTube first came out, if you were a skateboarder and you had a YouTube account, you would just get like roasted, like you fucking loser and all this, like you're such a kook, you're a poser. And because the threat was that it like this conduit kind of like cut off the need for having these like larger corporate entities kind of like run the show, right? And now today, every professional skateboarder has a YouTube channel. They do vlogs, they do blogs, they do skate vids, skate tutorials, and it's just a very common thing as part of the ecosystem. And I think journalism, like, that is already a thing, but I think it's going a little bit more like mainstream or credible. Like you always had like the Young Turks or whoever doing stuff on YouTube, right? But I think now you're just getting a lot more access through all these platforms to people that are doing it. They've seized the means.
For the record, he's talking about Young Turks like 15 years ago, not Young Turks now.
What are they doing now? The
Oh
only
my
time I watched them
god!
was 15
Don't even
years
like
ago.
they're what's his name? The guy. I forget. How do I forget his fucking name? He failed running for Congress. He's actually like a bit of a hawk now. They started off so well, you know. They were actually like a really strong radical voice, and now they're just like mainstream. They're
That's
like just
funny.
under
Yeah,
NBC,
I
you
know.
know.
Wow. I've literally only seen the only Turks video I've seen was probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that's when I was on. And I was like, oh wow, this is cool. But I was too young, so I went out, you know, getting shit faced every night and like didn't care about politics. You know, I wasn't gonna watch an hour long video about the news. Democracy Now?
Yeah.
Fuck out of here. I'll go ride my
Yeah, no
bike.
kidding. Um, well, we're speaking of uh, photojournalists. I know we both follow Anna Selick
Uh, is it Seneca or
and
yeah,
Selick. I'll post it up.
yeah.
Type
Here
it in
she
the chat or
is.
something.
Yeah, Anna Seneca.
And yeah, she was doing cultural photography before Russia invaded, like basically taking photos
Yeah,
of cultural clothing and all around the region, whether it's Ukraine or like Crimean Tatars or Belarusians,
yeah. Here we go.
Belarusian,
This is
Belarusian.
February 16th. Here,
Fuck.
you know, like look at
I
these
mean, appreciate
amazing.
that. Yeah, just appreciate that contrast. You know
I
what
do.
this feed is
I do want to point
less than a
out.
month ago.
I think this is the same outfit that the guy was wearing at the Freedom Convoy, who I photographed. His was. This
Mm.
looks like wool. His was definitely looked more cotton, but it had the same like. I don't know if that's for ammo, or what. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but very similar. Um, but yeah, a lot of young mothers, like just
Bit of a change.
beautiful, beautiful work.
And now she is in the Kiev Defense Battalion,
Yep.
and she has an AK.
Yeah, this is I think I talked about this in a story or something. This is like crossing the line between um being a photographer and being like an active member in like the thing, whatever it is. And I don't think like she's not a journalist necessarily as much as like a photographer. Um,
No, yeah, she is a photographer, peer, for sure.
but
She's also Ukrainian.
you can do both. Like you can do both. And if she
Yeah,
was a journalist, I would be saying like this does not discredit her work as a journalist. And I think this is kind of like Kozak Gundy, who is a Ukrainian, is a photographer, but is also like defending his homeland.
yeah. So yeah, I brought her up though because I recently got a quote from not a quote from Anna. I mean, email because I asked her about Azov because that's a big topic
Yeah,
of conversation, and they are objectively it's a far right organization
yeah,
for sure. I think they're like pre-war they were something like 1,200 to 2,000 or 2,400 members. It's hard to say how many of them held these kind of fascist views,
mm-hmm.
but enough of them to be concerning, for sure. And they have like Wolf Siegel-esque patches, and they're a problem. So I asked Hannah, I was like, I feel like the West needs some sort of context because it's such a sticking point for people. It's such like it's such like a flame point, like a
Mm-hmm.
flare up between people just like kind of just people extrapolate this small group of soldiers in Ukraine that are far right with the whole country or the government. And I don't think it's justified in kind of putting those politics onto a whole country or the government. Like, I think that's super ridiculous, especially because, I mean, like, coming from a country, Canada, especially the US, where we're talking about, like, you know, a nationalism problem. Yeah, we got that in spades. Probably the US arguably probably has a bigger nationalist problem than anywhere I know. But people use it to discredit, and it's been a very targeted thing for the Kremlin to kind of amplify as well with all their robots. And so I asked her, right, and she sent me an email. I should actually bring it up and read it exactly because I don't want to.
I thought of reaching out to her as well, but she's in the shit right now, and like I was just I don't want to put something on her, but you did, so you know.
I did, and to be honest, like I think she wants to talk to people.
Yeah,
but yeah. So what I discovered really, this is the whole thing, and why, like, and she's like, I've talked, like, messaged since, and like very, very cordial, and like lots of thank yous and lots of like thank you so much for spreading the word and all this. And she knows I have Ukrainian heritage and stuff. Like, we're tight, we're good. Maybe, I don't know.
Does she know that?
Is because she's.
Does she know that you and I are doing this together?
Not sure.
Okay. No. When I reached out to her, I asked her for those, I guess that censored footage of the cluster bombs. And I told her it was like, right, because me and my Ukrainian friend are trying to educate and do these live streams. And she was like very grateful that we were, you know, spreading the word and trying to like speak the truth. So it sounds similar to what you said, but yeah, I don't know. I thought of sending her a link to this just to be like, hey, this is what we're doing, and we want to support you.
Do you have time to watch?
No, don't watch it. Oh God. Hey, if you got time on the front lines in the trenches, just bring up this Twitch stream me and Furryfurrylonglong did.
But so I asked her about it, right? And she writes, what about Azov? Now they are defending Mariupol. This is the last fort post that prevents Russia from creating a corridor from eastern Ukraine to Crimea. Therefore, whatever context of the West regarding this regiment, they are fighting and dying for their country, and they're saving the lives of civilians. So I think this is where like our academic conversations over here about like, well, what's like, you know, what's the moral or ethical grounds of this and that, when you kind of approach to someone like Anna with that, they're just like, and I get it, like they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I literally just like shoveled someone's body off a sidewalk, right? Like, it's just, I think we have in the West, we just have so little relationship with like the horrors of what the fuck's going on. We really just don't understand. And we can't, and that's good. And I think it's great that people continue to fight to expose far-right elements in various countries and all this. But it might be more useful, or at least a little more intellectually honest, if you're going to concentrate on exposing far-right elements in Ukraine to somehow discredit people's solidarity or validate Russia's invasion, then you have to be honest enough to also acknowledge the far-right problem and the private military contractors like Wagner in Russia that have been disposing African leaders and flexing massive influence on that continent. You have to be honest about our own our own war crimes when it comes to private military contractors and people in the military like Blackwater, who slaughtered Iraqi civilians on film. So if we want to do that, if you actually like being intellectually honest, and let's talk about all the problems. And let's talk about the fact that if you're a Ukrainian right now, these problems aren't a problem. They don't like Anna, everyone there, like they don't feel like they're like, who the fuck cares what the West like wants or what context they want. We owe the West no such thing because we're trying to fight off a very large power that's belligerent and has an expressed interest in connecting that corridor from Russia to Crimea and then eventually to Moldova. It's in their policy. It's in their military academy doctrine. Like this is a factual thing they want to do. It's not just like my theory. It's written down in like multiple sources outside of Russia. So, yeah, there's that. And one other point about that too is we have to remember that where the Wagner Group in Russia, for example, or the USA's Blackwater, or our own fucking RCMP.
Don't forget, our RCMP are training the Ukrainian army.
Yeah, well, perfect, because they all share thin blue line patches, man. I don't know, man.
No, like literally right now, there are RCMP there.
Yeah. Like, so this is like the thing though, and that's a great segue into the point of it all and the crux. The fulcrum of the problem isn't necessarily that a country like Ukraine or a country like Serbia or a country like Chechnya have far-right elements, because every country has far-right elements or far-left elements that are problematic in politics. The fact is that no matter what happens in this conflict, whether the Ukraine wins or whether Russia wins, a group like Azov remains a uniquely Ukrainian problem, right? Where a group like Blackwater or our own military or RCMP or Russia's Wagner is an international far-right problem. They're groups that have international reach. They're engaging in proxy stuff beyond their borders. And so again, it just comes down to being like understanding that the Ukrainians don't fucking care what we think about their politics right now. Maybe after this war, yeah, it's a more productive conversation, but it's also just not intellectually honest to claim that this group inside Ukraine poses a particularly existential threat to the West or to the global South or to Russia or to Germany or Europe or Poland, while not acknowledging that our own nationalist and far-right military apparatuses pose a massive threat to everybody around the world, especially the Wagner Group, especially groups like Blackwater in the U.S. So, if we're going to be on, let's just all be fucking honest about this, right? Like, let's not try to deflect to a small amount of people in the Ukraine to justify a nuclear power very rudely and uninvitedly marching into their country and shelling civilians.
All right, can I say something that'll get me in trouble here?
Sure.
You generally, not you, but like people listening, the world should keep giving aid to Ukraine, and if it goes to the Ukrainian army, fine, and if it goes to the Azov battalion and you're in your feelings about that, it doesn't matter. That's my takeaway.
Why does it matter?
Why doesn't it matter?
Yeah.
You just explained it. You explained the whole thing. You did all the work. I'm just tying a bow around it. Like, it doesn't matter.
I don't think we should necessarily support the Azov battalion. I'm saying we should support the Ukrainian people. And right now, if the Ukrainian people feel like this is a block, these are like bullet catchers on the front line, so be it.
They're volunteers who are now under the command of the Ukrainian army. They have been absorbed into the ranks. They follow orders. They are not vigilantes. They are like now members of like a unified force. They're not a militia anymore, for now. And like you said, they are the only ones defending Mariupol. So Does a civilian in Mariupol give a shit? Does a Jew in Mariupol give a shit that the far right is defending their home? Like,
No, there's a bunch of Jewish operators, military operators in the country right now. They're probably right beside them.
yeah. Like it just
But
it right now, it doesn't matter. That's
right now, yeah.
yeah.
And it should at some point. It should matter. But we have to remember this is also this is a localized problem very far away from us. While we have definitely more influence over our apparatuses that actually reach around the globe. We have much more influence on our own policy in Canada and preventing our own government from selling arms to countries that shouldn't have arms, for example, rather than lose our shit over like a small group of neo-Nazis in some country that we didn't fucking care about 2 weeks ago. It just seems completely intellectually dishonest to even go there.
Well, Canada Land did a whole episode on support that went to the Azov battalion from the Canadian military. They made a whole episode about it. So I think they're invested in that story.
That's fair. Our military shouldn't give arms to them either.
I mean, now they should.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean. Like right now they should. Now I'm okay with it. Like 100%. And I know someone is going to be like, well, what happens after the war? Say the war's over, then you're going to have, all of a sudden, all of these weapons in the hands of these civilians. What armed groups are going to pop up after that? And it's like, we've seen it happen in the past, but we just don't know. We can't know. We can't have an academic discussion about that now that's going to actually solve anything or be productive. Like people are dying.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like it's, we have seen that in the past. We talked about a Contras Mujahideen, where we've given them weapons and, it's caused problems down the road.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think in the middle of the Afghan war, when they were being supplied, or in the middle of the Ukrainian conflict, it's not really like, it's not the best time to prevent it because it already happened. We like if we're gonna stop supplying these groups with arms, we have to kind of be behind or ahead of the ball before going into it, years going into it. We can't just be reactionary and be like, oh shit, did you guys know this group's here? Oh, did we give them arms? Oh my god, like, we're not going to send people in and ask them for the guns back at this point. It's too fucking late.
Like a return policy,
it's a problem, and it's a pattern of a problem. It's like it's constantly happening. The West is constantly supplying shitty people with way too much firepower.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you stop that. Again, I mean.
So, GFX has a question. The enemy of my enemy is an ally, but if we give some good equipment to Azov, will they use that in a civil war type struggle for power afterwards? I don't know enough about the history, so I could be wrong. But like the vibe that I've got over my like cursory research in the past few weeks is like these militias exist all over Ukraine. There are not militias that seek to overthrow government and cause revolution. Like they almost seem akin to political parties in a way. I'm not like trying to sanitize them, but they've been preparing for Russian invasion like in the days leading up literally to it. People were signing up to train for this event. And people were already prepared for it, and they are just one group who is prepared and, has nationalist aims. That's like as much as I can speak to. What do you think?
I think the bigger threat is them coming out of all this being heroes. They won't have to struggle.
Like legitimizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest threat in my opinion. Is there won't be a struggle. They'll just people roll out the red carpet if they save the country, and that could be problematic. Again, I think like I personally don't see a Ukraine with like geopolitical aspirations of expansion. I don't see that at all. But it's a problem for Ukrainian people that may be caught in a situation where they don't want to be, I don't know, under the boot of nationalist ideology.
Right? Yeah, but nationalism is not appealing to Ukrainians. Like, didn't the far right only get 3% in a coalition in the last election?
Yeah, it's not as big as everyone thinks. That's the whole thing too, right? That's why I said like as off before this was like 2,000 people, yeah. Where you have like the far right private military contractor in Russia, Wagner, that was 6,000, and that's also folded into the Kremlin apparatus for like deployment and stuff, right? So, yeah, it's so hard to say. GFX, like, I don't know. It's definitely a worry, but I think it's been very effectively amplified, and I don't know if it's as big of a problem as we think it is. It's the same way that people will say things like, "Oh, the Donbass really wanted to separate, and that's why." Russia had to go in. Everyone wanted to separate in there. And when you actually look at polling from internal polling in Donbass, even separatist polling, it's not even like it's much more than 50%, approaching 70% of people in Donbass that want to stay with Ukraine, right? Where people like, if you ask someone that just had a cursory look at some shit coming out of RT or Redfish, they'd be like, oh, like all of Donbass wants to join Russia, like it's all ethnically Russian, like everyone speaks Russian there. And then when you actually go to Donbass, it's just like people are just horrified. They're like, we just want to like, we'll just be part of Ukraine. It's fine, it's stable. Like we have a shitload of trauma from the Soviet era. We don't want to be part of Russia. And so again, I think it's just like it's always amplified coming out of Russia, coming out of their propaganda apparatuses, and it's probably downplayed by the West, and it's somewhere in the middle, and that middle seems really low to me still.
Did you have other questions in there or responses from Instagram?
Well, I had the one on Moldova.
I know nothing about Moldova.
Me neither, really. Moldova is interesting.
Oh, yeah, it's in the southwest.
About the Crimean Tartars the other day. That was a very interesting ethnic group in the in Crimea there, right? And
the Muslim Tartars.
Yeah.
You sent me something.
And the specific subset of the Crimean ones that were actually recognized in Ukrainian parliament, and they had status in Ukraine and all this. And I guess there was a bit of a crisis with a bunch of them fleeing Crimea when Russia took over, because Russia kind of revoked that status, and they've always been a little oppressive to the Tartars in their own country, right? So, one of those examples, I think like it's so ridiculous to have to have these conversations, but like, this is an ethnic minority in Crimea that had status and recognition in the supposedly far right Ukrainian government. and that status was taken away by the supposedly left neoliberal Putin, according to like, some people's takes on Putin. So it's just like, I don't know. Just like the far right militias, just like Azov, just like Donbass, just like the Crimean Tatars. I think there's a lot we don't know in the West, and it seems very, very muddy. But as far as Moldova goes, the region that people are asking about, or that's like kind of at risk, is Transnistria, which is like, if you look on a map of Moldova or bring it up, if you actually just Google Transnistria. Transnistria.
Oh, that flag's hard to look at. It's so strong.
So I wonder if you look at
it's just that region there.
Yeah, you see the strip?
Yeah, so it's like... Okay.
So when Lukashenko had that war map out there and he had those Russian troop stickers
down, I remember this.
Down in that area, that's kind of where it comes from. And people are wondering if they're going to connect that Black Sea waterfront right to this kind of separatist pro-Russia region in Moldova, and kind of make this like cut off Ukraine from the sea there completely, and almost in a way encircle Ukraine. If you're going up like that, like you have all that southern area down Crimea, and you kind of come up Moldova a little bit. You're almost like cradling Kiev there.
Well, someone was posing the theory that that Putin wants to split Ukraine across the river. So take all of eastern Ukraine.
That's part of doctrine too, though, that Alexander Dugin wrote about, is that they had to go into Ukraine and they couldn't stop until Kyiv.
Huh.
It's written in his geopolitic book. That's, like I said, that is a textbook in the military academy, in Russia's military academy, or whatever military academy. So it's definitely kind of like a school of thought that is like, we're going to cut this in half. We're going to have everything east of Kyiv. We're going to have the seaboard, the seafront, and then they take out all that fertile land, which is all in the east.
Yeah.
And all the oil reserves, which are all in the east and the south, I think, all that shale exploration. So they basically, like, they get all that good stuff, which is kind of the economic motive, perhaps. And what else? What is with their wheat here? I'm just going to see it again.
People always talk about the wheat, and I don't get it.
Well, because they supply a third of the world's wheat.
The world's wheat?
Yeah, Russia and Ukraine supply the third of the world's wheat, and I think Ukraine has a pretty big portion of that.
That can't be accurate.
They do.
You're telling me Ukraine, not China or America, supplies the most wheat?
You would think the Americas do.
Like, the prairies are fucking huge.
I don't know. I mean, there's not many people watching, but does anyone buy wheat? How is it expensive right now?
I don't know. Let's see what wheat futures are like.
Oh, God.
All right. What are wheat futures looking at? Give me a graph. I don't know what I'm doing here. GFX answered this for us. I'm not going to dig into this. I'm just going to run to the bathroom.
I'll just talk to myself. Yield is estimated for Ukraine. No, that's not right. Crop Explorer, that's an interesting website. Government website, USA. Ukraine wheat production by year. $33,000 MT. This one says Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine together produce nearly a quarter of the world's wheat. Five is Ukraine, eh? But I guess this disruption really has to consider Russia as well. I mean, if we're not, I'd imagine we're not importing Russian wheat right now, or it's more difficult, surely. I don't think we banned Russian wheat yet.
Oh shit, Ukraine.
And banning Russian wheat would probably be more harmful to Russia than oil.
Yeah.
Well, for us, I mean, Germany. So Germany's 87 million. Germany. I don't know Russia's exports very well. I feel like it was like Germany was like 87 million barrels a year of Russian oil.
Okay.
Which is a lot. Whereas the US is 11,000 or 12,000 barrels a year. And we talked about this briefly before we went on. We were kind of wondering, like, why does US bring in any Russian oil when they've been essentially energy independent since like shale technology took a little boom there.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you that I used to be a huge piece of shit and invest in oil back in the day, a long time ago, like 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you just disappeared.
Yeah, I'm coming back. I'm trying to fix my camera.
And yeah, so the US, like after discovering all the shale, like there's a bunch of companies in the US that were producing shale gas in Texas. And they basically, because of the price of extraction per barrel, they basically like weren't really they weren't really, what's the word, solvent, unless oil was over $70 a barrel. So when the US kind of like got this glut of oil into the system, and Canada did to a big extent with the oil sands, and the barrel oil barrels fell, like they tanked, right? They went down to whatever forever, like well under $70 a barrel. And a lot of these companies in Texas and Canada, a lot of these shale explorers kind of just went belly out. And like the US essentially achieved energy independence when it came to oil during those times, because they had the reserves and the equipment in place to completely not import any oil. And this is like well over a decade ago. So this small amount of Russian oil they bring in, and we were just like, what's the deal with that? It's just like a card in the USA pocket, like a sanction to pull out if they need it, kind of thing. You know,
it's weird.
I don't know. Yeah, they don't need it. Do you know if Canada imports any
oil? I don't think so.
Any from Russia?
Russia? No, I can't imagine. Like, I don't know. If GFX wants to Google it, Gotta
Yeah,
put our
fact checker.
fans to work. I'm trying to find a transcript of the Democracy Now thing because I do want to get to that. And I don't want to go super long this time.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
No rush. While you're finding that, though, I'll rant about oil a little more because I thought it was interesting when I threw up the question on Instagram if Germany is spending 2 billion euros. That'd be interesting of Germany to do. Just took a war. Just took World War III to do it. I think like that's the interesting thing though. Like it goes both ways, right? It's this double-edged sword of every time gas prices go up in Canada, you get so many people that are just so hawkish for pipelines and production and extraction. At the same time, simultaneously, you have record amount of EV cars sold. So it's kind of this thing where it pushes a country into more extraction while it also pushes the country into more investment in green tech. But I mean, yeah, green tech's always been a problem for Canada, hasn't it? We're a huge country and no one has a fucking imagination here, so they're like, oh, we can't get things across the country without oil.
they could literally just build more rail, build high speed rail.
Yeah,
We have a big,
we're
long,
not
flat
imaginative people.
section. Like, Japan's a fucking mountain. It's just a bunch of mountains, and they've got high speed rail. We can't put high speed rail across the fucking prairies. Like,
Mm-hmm. I know.
speaking of, we put a deposit down for an EV,
Oh, nice.
so we're one of those people.
One of them.
Yeah.
You can tell everybody.
Well, you're all gonna see it when I show up to a fucking blockade in my quiet EV that
I
looks
won't
very
hear you.
sexy.
I won't hear you. But yeah, I mean that's the thing with when everyone gets bullish on oil, when gas prices go up too, there's less tolerance for those kinds of blockades, and it's always a worry when you lose that public sympathy,
Hmm.
or when your government puts in an even more hardline policy against them. It does have a hardline policy now, of course, but when it becomes like when a government can frame oil production or oil supply or imports as like a matter of national security, then we get into a super weird territory of, well, what are they going to do if you block a pipeline? You're going to get fucking disappeared. Can you
Disappeared.
imagine blocking a pipeline? Can you imagine blocking a pipeline as a group of activists in Russia?
Oh God, no, no.
Right. And that's like, a country that's very dependent on that export or that import. It's terrifying once it becomes a national concern. I don't know. I'm a little bit scared of it. I don't know if we're about to talk about sanctions and oil and all that, but I don't know if banning oil exports has quite the desired effect we think it does. And I sure as fuck know that Coca-Cola and Starbucks pulling out of Russia doesn't do shit.
No. All right. I cannot find transcripts at all, so we might have to just wade through the Ilhan Omar interview, um, which I don't mind doing.
Why don't you set it up a bit? Because
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with her politics very
You
much.
don't know who Ilhan Omar is?
No, I know, but I just don't know. I'm not familiar with their politics or their background. Like, tell me where she's from.
Ilhan Omar was a Somali refugee when she arrived in America. She lives in the Midwest, which is actually like there's a town in the Midwest where like half the population is Somali or something. Huge community. Um, First African refugee to be a member of Congress, part of the squad, like a bunch of insurgent left-wing candidates who challenged incumbents and won, including AOC, Rashida Tlaib. I'm forgetting the names. I'm not up on my American politics as much these days. Anyway, she's a big left-wing voice. Not a big Bernie supporter. She wasn't originally on board with Bernie running in the last election, but came around. But yeah, definitely like a strong, powerful left-wing voice. But she's been in politics for a while now, and you can definitely see it in this interview how she has her adjacency to power has shifted the way that she talks about power. And I never thought I would hear her, of all people, someone who's from a place that has been subject to sanctions, to speak in support of sanctions. Like, it'd be like hearing, an Iraqi refugee argue for sanctions, given that those are some of the worst, most debilitating, estimated 60 million people died because of it. Starvation. Like, it's insane.
You think she's advocating for it because she knows firsthand how effective they are at?
Is Somali doing well? Like,
no, I don't want to justify it because, of course, it's like I think the idea that sanctions aren't supposed to target the people, like, I think that's the explicit purpose of sanctions, and government just doesn't like it to admit it. But the idea is you create a situation where the people are so fed up and so hungry and so wanting that they overthrow their own government.
But
like, you're crazy if you think you're going to put sanctions on and like a leader is going to just not hoard what he can or she can. It's like, oh yeah, what's goes into the country will be distributed into the populace. Like, obviously the leader's just gonna, like, they're not going to get fucking affected.
No.
The idea is for sure for the people to feel the pain and then do something.
All right, let's see.
Which is fucked up thing to do.
All right, so this is an interview on Democracy Now! And oops.
Allowed to trade stock. Their family members and their dependents shouldn't as well. I think it is time for us to.
Can you see the video?
Nope.
I don't think so. Okay, I think I have to add it as a video file, not as like a window on my desktop. So bear with me. I'm new at streaming, okay?
I'm deeply concerned about civilians trapped in active hostilities in numerous areas, and I urge all parties to take effective action to enable all civilians, including those in situations of vulnerability, to safely leave areas affected by conflict.
As the number of refugees fleeing Ukraine tops 2 million, the United
is it the sanctions? Yeah, I think it is the sanctions that hurt the people. I think the goal of the sanctions is to affect the people. Yeah. I really do. I don't see a situation where they affect the government to an extent, for sure, but I really think it's the explicit.
How does that work when you already have a despot, when you have an authoritarian who isn't popular, who doesn't have the support of the people? Like, what's 100% disapproval rating going to do for Putin? He's not going to give a shit. Like, it's pointless.
Yeah, they probably want to physically overthrow
him. So my partner is asking me to be quiet. So I'm going to have to wrap this up, but I will just sum this up for the stream. So what happened on the interview today with Democracy Now! Ilhan Omar was asked about Ukraine and asked about sanctions, and I forget the wording, but she basically said, like, of course sanctions are good. You know, we need to apply sanctions. Whatever the wording was, she was in support of it. I don't know if she said targeted or not. Whether or not targeted is even a thing or effective, we can debate, but she's for sanctions. Then later on in the interview, she was asked about a no-fly zone, and she said, or I think Amy Goodman asked, in the interest of protecting Ukrainian lives, would she support a no-fly zone? And she said, actually, it would cause more Ukrainian casualties if we enacted a no-fly zone. Which, I mean, it's like you're saying Ukrainian lives matter more than Russian lives, which are going to be lost via sanctions, by starvation, by conflict and strife that comes from these sanctions. If we take her at her word, she's saying, one matters more. And it's also it's in bad faith. She knows better, I think. I'm kind of at a loss for words. To be pro-sanction this late in the game in terms of foreign policy, having witnessed the last 30, 40 years, it just blows my fucking mind. And that's the leftist voice in the government. So,
right.
Yeah.
We're still supporting the thing. Yeah. GFX are asking if they hope that people rise up. That's my take on sanctions. It might not be that accurate, or it might not be accurate all the time. But my take is that sanctions, they know sanctions hurt normal people that don't support war. They know, they can't not know that. That'd be impossible. That'd be complete cognitive dissonance to think that they didn't affect regular people. Mm-hmm. And I think when regular people get angry enough, they demand change, or they marginalize themselves into hating the U.S., which also usually happens. So I don't know. It's interesting. We all know the U.S. is really, if they really want to, change something up in a country, we all know they can. I think drawing out these sanctions really long term, while not supporting a no-fly zone or not supporting any other action, is an interesting approach if you truly want to kind of change things up in that country. And
they could do it in a week.
Can't say it. It's a recorded live stream, but they could do it. We know they could do it. We've seen it.
In a conventional war, they could wipe out Russia's entire battalion at the border of Ukraine, or in Ukraine. They know where everyone is. If they wanted to, they could.
They could. Well, not only that, but a handful of Ukrainian peasants with tractors can also do some damage to the Russian army. Apparently, they're not that great of an army, it turns out.
No,
but
really
I think what I mean is there's very much some spycraft shit that the USA has done and disposed of leaders they've disagreed with without applying massive amounts of sanctions or conventional war before.
Only brown leaders.
Yeah.
Central America, South America.
Yeah.
Some in Africa.
Yeah, I talked about this. South America is a tough cookie for the USA.
Yeah.
Anyone that watches this, I recommend you watch Operation Gideon. I think that's the name of it. I know the operation was literally Operation Gideon, but it's about a private military contractor in the U.S. that the government claims wasn't dispatched by them, but they tried to regime change Venezuela and it was a fucking disaster. And like the Venezuelan army knew they were coming like weeks before they even came, and they like met them on the beach and arrested them all.
Oh,
bunch of
these
American
guys.
military contractors.
There are Canadians in there too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
right. There is.
Canadian
It's
vets.
such a joke. I'll tell you what. Like, South America's not fucking with our bullshit anymore.
No.
They're wised up.
Oh, I want to share before we go off. I have a hot take, super hot take. All right, did you hear about the thing with Poland and the MiG-29s they wanted to give to Ukraine?
Yeah.
So, but then the U.S. Anthony Blinken came out and said that it was unpalatable or was unfeasible, and that they wouldn't allow those jets to be operated out of the Ramstein Air Force Base, out of a U.S. controlled NATO Air Force Base. So I have a theory, and call me out on this later. I think Poland is going to say, fuck NATO. We're going to send in our own Air Force and we are going to help Ukraine. Because they are our neighbor, and the U.S. just shut Poland down from giving these planes to the Ukrainian Air Force. And it's going to show, like, where do your allegiances lie? Because what's NATO doing for Poland right now? You know? Russia's on their border. So I could see Poland just being like, look at the bravery of the people in Ukraine standing up. We're gonna fight with them.
I think that's not a bad take. I think I mean there's a million people marching in Warsaw and Prague. Solidarity with Ukraine with their neighbors is really, really high. I think Poland risks, like, if they go in, the NATO's going to completely neglect their Article 5, I'm sure. They'll be like, well, you're on your own. But I think Poland right now is like looking how popular that position is in their own country and their support for it. And Poland is looking at the Russian army getting wrecked by farmers. And they're probably like, you know what? Like, I think we could take them out. Like, and it's probably realistic. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Poland and Ukraine combined could very well eject Russian troops out of Ukraine, which is the goal, and the goal should stop there. Like, just getting them out of the country should be everyone's goal. And and Poland has to be nervous too. I mean, again, Russia has a clear policy of expansion right now. And if you're any of these like ex-Soviet bloc states, you're probably looking at it like, oh, wow, that's like, yikes.
Yeah.
Especially if my theory is that they go to Moldova and the Transnistria. And I think once if they do that, and if they do that sometime this year by year's end, or next year or the year after, I think we have to accept that all bets are off the table with them, and any previous Soviet bloc country in that area is completely fair game for them. And I'm not saying that, I know a bunch of people are going to hear that and be like, what about NATO doing that? And it's like, it's not about who's worse right now. It's just about the immediate existential threat that Poland might feel right now, or Lithuania might feel, or Estonia might feel, or Latvia might feel.
Of course. Yeah,
or Finland.
Poland shares that border with Belarus too,
And they share, yeah, exactly. I'll again recommend anyone to look up Alexander Dugin and look at his writings that is taught in military culture in Russia. That includes taking over of Ukraine. It includes taking over of parts of Finland and the Baltic states.
Why don't you make a little Google Doc, and I'll make a post in the coming days to like, hey, here's the stuff we recommended, along with I didn't even get to go into the photojournalists. Put it all in one place.
Yeah, good call. People could read for themselves. Caveat, not about NATO versus Russia. About Russian policy right now. All right.
That's it.
That's it.
That's
walk my dog.
155, almost a podcast.
Cool, we're ahead.
All right. Good night.
All right. See you later. Thanks.